What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about none other than Jahan of Divinity Original Sin and Original Sin 2. For the people who have only played Original Sin 2, you might be completely unaware of the fact that Jahan is actually a returning character from Divinity Original Sin 1. However, because of how far Divinity Original Sin 2 is after the Original Sin 1, they basically don't have anything to do with each other than the setting and the prevailing story arc about the Void. Beyond that, they're honestly not connected that much, so you'd be forgiven for not picking up on this, especially if that's the only game you had played. So, Divinity Original Sin takes place in 4AR, whereas Divinity Original Sin 2 takes place, I believe, in 1242 AD. So as you can see, there's about a 1200 year gap there. Very large. Now you might be wondering, how did Jahan become a returning character if that was literally 1200 years ago and he's just a human being? That is exactly what I wanted to explore with you, and while I considered making a video in my own voice telling you all about it, it occurred to me that why let all of that amazing voice acting from Original Sin 1 go to waste? So with no further ado, here is all of that information from none other than Jahan's perspective himself. So this is the story of how he came to be a demonologist that is very, very old. I'll catch up with you guys towards the end of the video.
Yes, let's get this over with. Once upon a time, I was a king in a land of beauty to the east. A land of tigers and slender towers, of deserts and forests, of sun and all the world's wealth. I was a young king, handsome and all-powerful. Every nobleman would have killed his own brother if I promised to take his daughter's hand in marriage. But I refused their incessant implorations. I knew my life as a sovereign would be self-indulgent, but also a self-delusory one, if I weren't to marry for love. And so a handful of years went by. The king's throne I myself occupied, whereas the queen's throne remained empty but for the court's cats that would nap the afternoons away upon its velvet cushions. But then one day, a young woman visited my kingdom. She was a poetess and a storyteller. People flocked to her, listened to her every word as if receiving mantras from the divines. I invited her to my palace, and soon our days, our nights, our love and our lives intertwined. Hiraka. How I miss her still. Miss the brilliance of her mind that was both as sparkling and as unbreakable as the diamonds that adorned her body. Oh, and how I miss her body. 1,000 artists I could have commanded, show me beauty. But she would have effortlessly surpassed their every endeavor, and curving her lips into a smile, make them break their sculptures in tearful impotence. And yet, true happiness, that commodity more precious and even more fleeting than the dominion of kings, sang to us like the nightingale, only to depart come the dawn of our first year's unity. A malady overtook me, and I began to wither. It was an unparalleled horror. Scores of physicians flocked to my bedside. They traveled from realms across the seas hoping to cure the mighty Jahan, undo the gloom that had befallen the land, and mere vultures that they were, to be paid handsomely for their efforts. But none of their potions took effect. Their salves seared, but did not soothe my fading flesh. Like a ghoul I looked, unburied yet risen from the grave. In futile anger I struck my mirror, but broke my brittle fingers only, not its ever-mocking surface. It went like this, Hunter. If a ghoul I had become, so a dark turn of thought convinced me, a ghoul's methods I should employ to escape the labyrinthian crypt of corporeal corruption. A necromancer I'd be. Yes, Only from deep within the deliriums of death would I tunnel my way back into the gardens of life. I did unspeakable things in the dusky dungeons that twist like forgotten veins to long-deceased organs far beneath my castle's sunlit halls. Halls which held my throne and held the bed upon which Heraka slept, her very touch blessing the satin she reposed upon. Still there came no relief. Perversions I created in scores, but they were mere undead all. Creatures so piteous that the thought of cheating death in their guise frightened me more than the swing of the scythe itself. Like mosquitoes in the night, panic and despair beset me until I turned to that darkest of all arts, demonology. It had to be. There was no other way. I could feel the life slipping out of me like love out of a betrayed spouse's heart. So I studied tomes so old the dust that fell from their centuries' unperused pages never knew the light of the stars that now shine. I drew forbidden symbols. I spoke unhallowed words, and from the smoke that rose like a dragon's last breath, a demon appeared to me and said, "Ask, O blighted king, and you shall have." "Just tell me," I cried. "Tell me what ails me." Heraka. Never had I known a single word can cut deeper than the sharpest of daggers. With maddening glee, the demon told me she was one of his kin. A soul-swallowing horror that had been feeding on both my body and my spirit like a leech. An ancient being was she, that moved from king to king throughout the ages, filling their hearts with love, then draining them of life. After such revelations, does one truly desire to live on? Death seemed like a mother then, welcoming me with her all will be well embrace. Yet still I feared exceedingly her seemingly sweet caress, and the oblivion that would follow. Release me from her, demon, and give me back the strength of a sick, free existence. So went my desperate plea. Desired it smiled, of course it did. Smiled bare 100 razors as its eyes came alight with infernal fire. 1,000 years I will give you, it whispered. But then your soul shall be mine to incarcerate in the depths of hellish nemesis. As for your throne, that I'll have now. What say you, O brittle king? Do you accept my terms? I did. Yes, I hissed, fool that I was. I should have died that day. But instead, I fell into a stupor and awoke in a different realm of Rivellon, bereft of all my wealth, and with my soul betrothed to a demon's debauchery that would be 10 centuries in the making. But it had also kept its promise, that life-seeding obscenity of a creature, for I was my young, my healthy self again. And yet, my bodily convalescence merely betrayed my utter mental degradation. A necromancer and a demonologist I had become. A lowly conjurer of atrocities whose every heartbeat screamed Heraka, and pumped the bitterest of biles through my being. Like a savage, I lived in the wilds, a companion of beasts, not man. It was there that I learned to love them so, the animals of this world. These gentle beings that don't know the meaning of betrayal or greed, that kill but to feed, not because it brings them wealth or pleasure. In time, resolve settled within my soul, despite being so irrevocably besieged by dissolution. I decided that I wouldn't accept the shackling of my being so easily. 1,000 years the demon had given me, and 1,000 years I dedicate to pitting my knowledge of demonology against its eponymous creatures. Yes, it is my resolve to kill the thing I summoned, and I have been stalking it for well over 9 centuries. I, Hunter, I am nearly 1,000 years old. 25 of them a king, the rest a restless predator. Balberith is the demon's name. If I don't find and slay him before the year is out, my soul will be his to torture eternally. Now you know what drives me. Now you know the reasons for my haste. Either I fail and suffer for all time, or I win and life everlasting will be mine. That is a good question. As for Hiraka, I don't know what happened to her. I have seen my erstwhile palace from afar, a ruin now, a house of wind and dust. Beyond a doubt, she moved on and lies, as we speak, in the arms of another king, assuring him he's only a bit under the weather, that his humors will be in balance again within a matter of days. Poor man. Like all men, he's a fool. Oh, but how I long to be wise. There has to be a first, hasn't there? If I can look her in the eye and denounce her, that shall be a start. But perhaps that day will never come. Born a fool and buried a fool. Perhaps that is simply how it must be.
Alright, so obviously we just learned a ton about Jahan's background and his motives, but before we get into any examination of that or any talk of it, I just want to mention that his story obviously revolves around hunting down this demon named Balbereth, who we can actually find. That's part of his actual companion quest for Divinity Original Sin 1. Basically, we learn from the conversation when you catch up with Balbereth that Jahan is trying to kill him, not only to basically seek some kind of weird revenge, but because Jahan has learned that if he kills Balbereth, the immortality that Balbereth gave him becomes permanent. Basically, Balbereth dying makes him unable to take Jahan's soul, but leaves the magic that was used intact. So Jahan effectively becomes immortal, which is obviously how he survived all the way up to Divinity Original Sin 2, which makes him, in Divinity Original Sin 2, roughly 2,300 years old, give or take. So he's been around a very, very long time. Once we kill Balbereth, he does have a couple more things to say, so I'm going to let that play out, and then we'll talk some more.
The tormented millennium have fallen from my soul, and finally it is mine again. My life, my liberty. And not for a handful of years borrowed from fickle gods. No, it is mine perpetually. I know I might well have failed if it hadn't been for you. I thank you, and with what powers I have, I bless you. Together we will venture forth to undo the void, so that my life's newfound longevity will not be meaningless. So that one day, in perhaps another 1,000 years, I will look upon the face of Hiraka once more, and make my heart a stone. The tombstone neath which the witch will be buried. After that, I shall finally know peace. After that, I may sit and rest and settle. Perhaps even love anew. Ha! What fancies, what dreams, what castles in skies too stormy as yet to seat them. With a wave of the hand, let me discard them. We have much to do and many to fight. And so, my friend, let us not tarry. Onward, for victory begs us to seize her.
All right, and with that, we basically wrap up Jahan's Divinity Original Sin 1 story. Now, obviously, that gets continued in Divinity Original Sin 2, and obviously he was up to, probably something in the last 1,200 years before Divinity Original Sin 2. So my best guess personally is that in between 1,200 years, he tracked down Hiraka and dealt with that situation, because once we find him in Divinity Original Sin 2, he actually makes no mention of that really at all, which makes me feel like it was probably dealt with in some way, which I think is fair given the sheer amount of time that has passed. Furthermore, Divinity Original Sin 2 does add to his story a little bit, because he is deeply involved in origin character Los's, I don't know how you pronounce her name, the origin character of the possessed woman named Losa, I guess. He's deeply involved in her subplot, and if you are not playing with her, he is actually still involved in that quest line, though the origin character part of it makes it a little more interesting, in my opinion, but most of it is still intact even if she's not in your party, which is probably where you know Jahan from if you're watching this video, to be honest. So, there you go, guys. There is the story of basically my favorite NPC in all of Divinity lore. I think the guy is awesome. There are a lot of cool characters for sure. I'm a big fan of Arhu as well, but Jahan always just really stuck out to me. I just thought he was such a cool character. So I really wanted to share all that information and kind of lore with you guys. So there you go. I sincerely hope they put Jahan in any further Divinity games they make, since, you know, obviously he has a built-in excuse to be there. Tell me what you guys think. Do you think he's a cool character? Do you think he's a douche? Let me know down in the comment section below. Either way, hope you like, comment, subscribe, stick around, do all that YouTube jazz, but thank you so much for watching, and have an amazing day.